A constituent assembly is a body or assembly of representatives composed for the purpose of drafting or adopting a constitution. As the fundamental document constituting a state, a constitution cannot normally be modified or amended by the state's normal legislative procedures. Instead, a constituent assembly, the rules for which are normally laid down in the constitution, must be set up. A constituent assembly is usually set up for its specific purpose, which it carries out in a relatively short time, after which the assembly is dissolved. A constituent assembly is a form of representative democracy. Unlike forms of constitution-making in which a constitution is unilaterally imposed by a sovereign lawmaker, the constituent assembly creates a constitution through internally imposed actions, in that members of the constituent assembly are themselves citizens, but not necessarily the rulers, of the country for which they are creating a constitution. As described by Columbia University social sciences professor John Elster, constitutions arise in a number of different ways. At the non-democratic extreme of the spectrum, we may imagine a sovereign lawgiver laying down the Constitution for all later generations. At the democratic extreme, we may imagine a constituent assembly elected by universal suffrage from the sole task of writing a new constitution. And there are all sorts of intermediate arrangements. Examples: Costa Rica right after the 1948 Costa Rican Civil War that overthrew Rafael Angel Calderón government. The leaders of the victorious side call for an election of a constituent assembly in the same year. The assembly successfully drafted and approved the current Costa Rican constitution. France. During the French Revolution, a national constituent assembly was formed when representatives assembled at the only location available, a tennis court, and swore the tennis court oath on June 20, 1789, promising that they would not adjourn until they had drafted a new constitution for France. Louis XVI recognized the validity of the National Constituent Assembly on June 27, 1789. Iceland. On the 27th of November 2010, Iceland held an election for a constitutional assembly, with 522 people vying for 25 delegate seats. The Constitutional Assembly, in session for 4 months from early April until late July 2011, drafted a new constitution and passed it unanimously with 25 votes against 0 with no abstentions. Parliament put the bill to a national referendum the 20th of October 2012, in which 67% of the voters declared their support for the bill. Further, 67% of the voters declared their support for equal voting rights and 83% declared their support for national ownership of natural resources. Two key provisions of the bill. Parliament has failed to ratify the bill, however, inviting accusations that the political class is trying to thwart the will of the people by disrespecting the result of the 2012 constitutional referendum. India. The Constituent Assembly of India was elected to write the Constitution of India, and served as its first parliament as an independent nation. It was set up as a result of negotiations between the leaders of the Indian independence movement and members of the British Cabinet Mission. The Constituent Assembly was elected indirectly by the members of the Provincial Legislative Assembly, which existed under the British Raj. It first met on December 9, 1946, in Delhi. On August 15, 1947, India became an independent nation, and the Constituent Assembly started functioning as India's parliament. Dr. Ambedkar drafted the Constitution of India in conjunction with the requisite deliberations and debates in the Constituent Assembly. The Assembly approved the Constitution on November 26, 1949, and it took effect on January 22, 26, 1950, a day now commemorated as Republic Day in India. Once the Constitution took effect, the Constituent Assembly became the Provisional Parliament of India. It was provisional until the first elections under the new Constitution took place in 1952. The whole process took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days from start to finish. Italy. The Constituent Assembly of Italy was established in 1946 in the wake of Fascist Italy's defeat during World War II. It was elected with universal suffrage, simultaneously with a referendum about the adoption of republic or the continuation of monarchy. Voters chose republic, and the new assembly had the task to approve the new republic governments, as well as to write a new constitution. This was approved on the 22nd of December 1947. It was dissolved on the 31st of January 1948, to be replaced by the new Parliament of Italy. Nepal has had 2 constituent assemblies, the current one being elected after its predecessor failed to deliver a constitution. Despite multiple extensions, it also serves as the country's parliament. Finally, Nepal had made constitution with 89% majority. Nepal is adopting federal states soon. Russia. The Russian Constituent Assembly was established in Russia in the wake of the October Revolution of 1917 to form a new constitution after the overthrow of the Russian Provisional Government. Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan Parliament approved to create a Sri Lankan Constitutional Assembly on March 9, 2016, proposed by Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. The Assembly will draft a new constitution for Sri Lanka. Turkey. Constituent Assembly of Turkey was established in 1961 after the 1960 Turkish coup d'etat to prepare a democratic constitution. The constitution was prepared and approved by the voters in a referendum of 1961. United States Federal. The most famous constituent assembly in U.S. history was the U.S. Constitutional Convention that drafted the still current United States Constitution in 1787. Unlike most constitutions, the U.S. Constitution may be amended by Congress, although not as part of its normal business. Again, unlike other constitutions, amendments do not change the text of the Constitution but are appended to it. While there is provision for calling one, no federal constitutional convention has been called. In part this is due to Congress being able to amend the Constitution without a convention, and the daunting requirements for holding a new constitutional convention, but also because of the fear that wholesale changes in the federal constitution might undermine a document that has stood the test of nearly 225 years. States. A tradition in the use of constituent assemblies exists at the state level of constitutionalism. In fact, constituent assemblies met in the states before the formation of the federal constitution in 1787 as well as after its ratification. Since 1776, nearly 150 state constitutional conventions have met to draft or revise state constitutions. These early state constitutional conventions frequently did not use procedural steps like popular ratification that became commonplace in the mid-19th century. Yet they were considered to be constituent assemblies that exercised their authority as that of the people. As American sovereigns, the people and America's constitutional tradition before the Civil War by Christian G. Fritz notes, a legitimate constitution depended on whether the sovereign people authorized it, not whether a particular procedure was used or whether revolutionary conventions were free of other responsibilities, such as passing ordinary legislation. It was the people as the sovereign who authorized drafting those first constitutions that gave them the legitimacy, not whether they used procedures that matched what was later understood to be necessary to create fundamental law. American state constituent assemblies in the 19th and 20th centuries reflected many qualities of a citizens' movement. For the start of state American constitution making, delegates to constitutional conventions studied earlier state models of constitutions. They often self-consciously borrow constitutional text and provisions from other states. They often used in the drafting and debates compact and pocket-sized compilations of all the existing American constitutions, so that the Constituents Assembly could draw upon the latest in constitutional design. Countries without an entrenched constitution. A few countries do not have an entrenched constitution which cannot be amended by normal legislative procedures. The United Kingdom, New Zealand and Israel are examples. In these countries there is no need to call constituent assemblies, and no provision to do so, as the legislature can effectively modify the constitution. If such a country decides to implement a constitution, presumably some sort of constituent assembly will have to be set up for the purpose. The Constitution of New Zealand consists of a collection of statutes, treaties, orders in council, letters patent, decisions of the courts and unwritten constitutional conventions. Because it is not supreme law, the Constitution is comparatively easy to reform, requiring only a majority of members of Parliament to amend it. The constitutional law of Israel is determined by the Knesset, which, since 1949, serves as the country's ongoing constituent assembly. The Knesset has the power to create basic laws of Israel, laws which are entrenched legislation and will become part of a future Constitution of Israel, as well as regular statutory legislation.